one of my first ever clients, he was a 12-year-old kid. He didn't want to get coached on communication. But how I convinced him, I just said, "What do you want? Like, what do you want out of life?" He said, "I want a dog, but my dad won't buy me one."
Oh boy.
Right? So I said, "What if I make you the best presentation in the world to convince your dad to buy you?" So in every week he refined that presentation because he wanted that. He was like, "What about this?" And I said, "No, kid, you can't do this because you need to create more buy-in. What's the incentive for Brian to say yes here?" So you got to say, okay, say this is $7 an hour, so you'll mow the lawn. So we created this whole presentation, and they bought him a dog in 4 weeks. True story, by the way.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to another episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the topic of public speaking, and we're joined by Brenden Kumarasamy of MasterTalk. Brenden, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Brian and Tanya. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, Brenden, let's start off. I know I've had the opportunity to speak with you before, but for everyone who doesn't know you, who is Brenden Kumarasamy?
Yeah, absolutely. So Brenden, I guess, is the founder of MasterTalk. I make YouTube videos on communication and public speaking, and I coach executives and entrepreneurs. But more than that, I would say, I'm someone who really cares about helping other people. I had a lot of challenges myself growing up, especially with communication or just life in general. So I really see my mission as how do I serve people and make their lives better.
Awesome. Now, one of the things that you kind of touched on at the end there, Brenden, was just some of the challenges that you've had to overcome, in terms of communication, but you said also life in general. So what I'm assuming is that everything that you've been through kind of fuels what you do today. So can you share some of the backstory? What is it that kind of led to you being where you are today?
Yeah, for sure, Brian. So for me, the backstory is I'm born and raised in a city that both of you know very well called Montreal in Canada. And for those who don't know, Montreal is a city where you need to know how to speak French. Except I didn't know the language. So my whole life, not only was I stressed about giving presentations, I had to present in a language I didn't even know. It's whenever I was in a first grade or second grade classroom, I'd look at the audience and go, bonjour. Right? And that was my life growing up as a kid. And the other challenge I had that I don't think I mentioned last time, Brian, when we talked, is I have a crooked left arm. And that's because I had a surgery when I was younger. And I still have that physical disability to this day. And it was really hard for me to make friends when I was growing up as a kid because I had this massive cast that wasn't just in my arm, it was also in my body. So no one really wanted to talk to the kid who doesn't know how to speak French and has a weird cast. So those are a couple of the challenges I've had.
Okay. Yeah. And, I wasn't aware of that. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I guess that would make things difficult, especially the language barrier. Like, we were just saying off camera that we actually just came back from visiting New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And yeah, Quebec isn't necessarily a place you want to be if you if you don't speak French. It makes a lot of things challenging, but I would say especially education, that seems like it would be a pretty significant challenge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, education was definitely. It's not so bad, if you come as a tourist. Like most people speak multiple languages here, so you'll get along just fine. But it's just more in general, to live here, to have a job here. It was really challenging. So I spoke mostly my second language most of my life, and then when I got to university, when I went to Concordia specifically, that's when I learned how to speak because I did these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. Right? So all the guys my age are playing like rugby or soccer or football. I was doing presentations competitively, and that's how I learned how to communicate. And then as I got older, I started coaching a lot of the students who are younger than me, not because I was a great coach or anything, but because the alternative they had was a rock. So I started helping them, and that's what sparked the idea for the YouTube channel because I felt a lot of the info I had wasn't really available for free on the internet for people.
So I have to ask, with all this communication, would you classify yourself as an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm what they call, Tanya, an extrovert.
I was going to say, because when it comes to this kind of stuff, the assumption is that you're not an introvert if you're doing all this public speaking and presenting, right?
Right, but I'm glad you mentioned that because 70 to 80% of the people I've worked with in my career are introverts, right?
Okay.
They're not extroverts. And they're also the best communicators. And there's actually a few reasons for that. That's why there's a common misconception around this, Tanya. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
Right, so there's a couple of things that introverts actually do way better than people like me that took years to refine. The first one is they're much better at listening, right? So when you're introverted, you'll speak less on average, which means that you'll communicate and listen more effectively. You'll be able to adapt to the message a lot quicker. That's number one. Number two is introverts are a lot better at pausing, right? So when we think about pausing, because you speak more on average as an extrovert, you pause a lot less. Whereas introverts are very comfortable with silence. They can sit there for 30 seconds and just stare at you. Whereas an extrovert goes like, okay, like, what's your favorite color, Brian? What's your favorite color? So they're always trying to fill up space. And then the third piece is they're a lot more accessible. You know, Gary Vaynerchuk is someone I look up to a lot. He's the CEO of VaynerMedia. He's a massive social media brand. But you either really love the guy, you really don't. There's no in between with this guy. Whereas with Brene Brown, you're not allowed to say things like, I hate Brene Brown. The FBI is going to put you in jail if you say things like that. So there you go.
Oh, perfect. Now, the other thing too, I'm curious about, because you talked about these competitions that you were in. How do you get evaluated in one of these? It's always been one of the things I'm curious about when we had this conversation before.
Yeah, man, fantastic question, Brian. So a lot of the grading criteria, you two, is a lot more subjective than objective. Because at the end of the day, if 13 schools are presenting and they have to pick winners, 5 of them probably have the right solution. And just to give context around these, how these competitions work essentially is, let's say Nike would give us a problem. They would say, okay, team, I need you to tell me where to sell my next shoe. Should I sell this brand new shoe in Portugal or Italy, and why? That's like an example of a business case. And then students have 3 hours to read a 20-page document with all the data that they provide you, find a solution, make slides, do financials, create all these slides, and at the end of the 3 hours, present their solution to executives of the company, generally speaking.
Wow.
So you're like 20, 21 years old, and you're presenting to a guy who's worked at Nike or a girl who's worked at Nike longer than you've been alive, essentially. And that's what you're doing. But in terms of the valuation, let's say 5 of those teams, Brian and Tanya, have the right answer, which let's say is Italy. Now the question becomes, how do you pick who wins and who loses? Because they all have the right solution. And now the difference becomes, how detailed is your analysis? How detailed is your implementation? How detailed are your numbers? And more importantly, how great is your communication? Because some people, let's say a 4th place team might go, hi everyone, my name is Brenden and this is Brian, this is Tanya. And they have the right solution, but they're 20. They're scared presenting in front of these executives. And then you get like a 1st place team that I coached people on to sound something more like this. They would get in like sharks. They would look at the judges and say, ever since I was a kid, I always loved wearing Nike because Nike represents so much more than just a shoe, but a way of life. For the single mother who wakes up every morning at 8 a.m. to go for a run, even if she has 3 kids running at home, to the Olympian gold medalist who's wearing a pair of Nikes to win that race, to the 7-year-old kid who wants to be the fastest runner in the playground. Nike, you've revolutionized. You're like pampering the brand. And the VP is looking at you and going, this kid presents better than all of my executives combined. That person wins. So that's how the valuation is.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's all about that passion too, right? And I sometimes think like talking with your hands, you see people doing that, but it really is, when it comes down to it, the words and how you use them to, I don't know, would you agree, to present a story, I guess? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, Tanya. It's all about how do we use our cadence or tonality, especially in the context of case competitions, to really make judges feel really special. But that also applies outside of case competitions, which is, How do we communicate in a way that gets people excited about our ideas? Hence why we mix content and delivery. Because if you just have good content, and I came here and I just said, okay, these are the tips, guys, this is what you should do, you won't actually implement it. Versus if you add the delivery, you add the cadence, you add the tonality, it makes people want to take action and not just listen.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Now, in terms of public speaking and developing the competency of just being able to present in front of a group, what are some of the core principles that you'll teach to your students, or just teaching someone who's just getting started?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. So I call this my easy threes. So communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. And if you try and juggle all 18, all of them are going to fall. Body language, storytelling, eye contact, smiling, facial expressions. It gets really confusing. So instead, let's focus on the 3 easiest balls to juggle, which are simply this: the random word exercise, question drills, and the third one is video messages. So the first one is the random word exercise. Pick a random word like phone or screen or silver and create random presentations out of thin air. And what this does, team, is if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. Do that a few times a day. That's number 1. Number 2, question drills. We get asked questions all the time. Podcasts, right? On TV shows, or maybe not TV shows, but podcasts, work, school, boardroom. But a lot of us are reactive to those questions. We're not proactive. So when I started guesting on shows a few years ago, I sucked, especially when Brian interviewed me back then. I was probably like at podcast 50 or something. So it wasn't that great. So one question I remember getting you to was like, where does the fear of communication come from? And I looked at the guy and I said, I don't know, man. Los Angeles, San Diego, you tell me, right? So I was terrible. So now I'm a lot more proactive. Every day for 5 minutes, guess one question that you think the world will ask you and write out the answer. If you do that once a day for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions. And the last one, really quick, video messages. Make a list of people that you love. And Brian, I recommend you do this with Tanya. Send her video messages. Just go, hey, I really appreciate you and everything you do for our family. It really means a lot to people. Nobody does it. That's it.
Awesome. Well, no, that's some great tips to begin. Now, in terms of your, so you have a YouTube channel as well where you share some of these tips. And, when I last looked, you had over 26,000 subscribers. I'm just going to share that for those who are watching. So there's the link to Brenden's channel. It's basically, if you search MasterTalks, you're going to be able to find him. But can you talk to us about your YouTube channel, kind of, and the success you've seen behind that as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't remember what the sub count was when we first met, Brian. I think it was under 10,000, probably. That was probably like at 4 or 5. And I think what I would say, if there's anything I've learned from YouTube, the first 10,000 are the hardest. But after because it took me 2.5 years to get to 10,000. But then after I hit 10,000, the YouTube channel really took off and started building momentum really quickly. Like now the channel's growing at 1,000 subscribers a month, which I'm super, super grateful for. It was a lot of grind. But I think what I would say is it depends how badly you want it. Because for YouTube, you got to think in decades, not days. So for me, when I started the YouTube channel at the bright old age of 22, right? So I said, where do I want this channel to be at 32? When I'm 32 years old. That's the way that I thought about it from the beginning. So I invested a lot of my own personal money into the YouTube channel to make it successful. And the other piece that I'll say around YouTube is quality matters a lot more than quantity. And it's a lot more important to think about the conversations you're having with people one-on-one versus the follower count. One thing I told myself when I started the YouTube channel was I don't care if I need to go on 10,000 podcasts and it's only the host listening to me. I'm sure there's more people. But even if it was just the host and I did 10,000 podcasts, luckily I didn't have to do 10,000, thankfully. But even if I had to, at least I would have 10,000 subscribers. And that was my mentality from day one because I cared so much about adding value. Like the person you introduced me to after we had our podcast, Brian, he never paid me a dime, but I always helped him because I was so passionate about making sure that his mission succeeds. And obviously, Varun has done incredible things with the startup. But I think that's the key that I want to drive is you need to be willing to give first and give a lot to get the results like this.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, I think that's great. And the mentality behind that is, what we believe in as well, right? And seeing that, like, even today for presentations and stuff like that, we have so many people that their boardroom, I guess you could say, is their social media platform, right? So let's talk about that, the wonderful world of social media. Everybody's on it. What can you recommend in regards to getting in front of that camera and how can we speak more effectively when we're speaking to our audience, customers, all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely, Tanya. It's a fantastic question. So here's the way that I think about it. I never start with social media, and I'll tell you why. Because people have so much nerves around it. They're like, oh, I don't know, should I put myself out there? So I always start with let's learn the right lesson first. So what do I mean by this? A lot of us see communication like a chore, Tanya. Like, oh my God, I have to get on social so that I get more business, so that I get more brand exposure, so that hopefully somebody hires me. Oh my God. And they're kind of dreading the footsteps towards it. In the same way, by the way, I dreaded my first videos when I started my YouTube channel. So I'm definitely not the exception. I'm the norm like everyone else. So given that fact, given that reality, how do we train ourselves to actually enjoy presenting on video? And the way that we do this is not by focusing on social media. The way that we do this is by making a list of 10 people that we deeply care about in our life. Mom, brother, sister, nieces, nephews, kids, clients that we really adore, people we love working with, and asking ourselves a simple question. When was the last time we sent them a 20-second video note? Just to say, hey, really appreciate having you in my life. Why am I saying this, though? The reason I say this is because this exercise teaches us a valuable lesson, which is what is communication for? And what we learn from those video messages when we wake up the next morning is almost everybody, despite our limiting beliefs, oh, what will I look like? Almost all of them will DM you back and say, wow, I've never gotten a video message. That was so thoughtful, Brian. Thanks so much for sending that. Wow, this is so like it makes their day. And that's when we realize communication is actually to create impact. It's a scaling tool. And that's what happens with video. So what's the advice? Send it to your customers first, send it to your clients first, send it to your employees first, and then focus on social later.
I like that. And it is true. And it's funny, right? You say, what am I going to look like? Before you get in front of the camera, you want to make sure this, that, and the next thing. But yeah, I can't say I've ever received a video message. So that's probably going to have to be, not probably, have to be something that I add to my to-do list.
Oh, you'll get one tomorrow from Brian.
There you go. No pressure, no pressure.
Yeah, no, don't put me on the spot at all. No. Exactly. Now, in terms of when we're giving presentations, I know a lot of folks who I've worked with in the past really like to focus on the slides. Like, in some of the presentations that you've done in the past when you're doing those competitions, sure, the content on those slides are important, but how much focus should really be dedicated to that versus preparing the actual communication component, the verbal communication?
Yeah, good point, Brian. So it really depends on the type of pitch. So for example, if you're doing a sales pitch for like a B2B company, of course the slides are like absolutely crucial because the decision makers will read over the slides prior to the meeting. So it always depends on the situation. But I'll say the principle that holds true is a lot of people don't spend enough time on delivering. They spend too much time on content, and the allocation of time that is being spent on delivery versus content is absurd. Like they spend 97% of it on content, like 3% on delivery, which is like, okay, like we got like 2 hours for the presentation, so like how do we deliver this? That's usually the mindset. So how do we get around this? I would say I teach a strategy called puzzle, which is essentially this. Communication is like a jigsaw puzzle, you two. Right, you know those little toys that you two probably play because you got 4 kids. You probably do, right, some version of Jigsaw Puzzle.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll ask both of you. Let's ask Tanya because she's probably the one spending most of the time with the kids. So the question for you, Tanya, is when you're doing these puzzles, let's say with Brian or people in the family, which pieces do you start with first and why?
Right. So I always tell the kids, you got to do the outside, the border first, and then work your way in.
Why is that? That's the correct answer. Absolutely.
Why is that? Well, I don't know. it just works easier that way. You get rid of all those pieces and you can start going with the inside.
Absolutely, that's exactly right, Tanya. Right? Because they're easier, and I would add they're easier to find in the box too.
There you
So
go.
you find them and then you put them up together. So perfect answer. But the question is, why do I bring that up? And the reason I bring that up is because in communication, we never do that. We do the opposite. We start with the middle first. We shove a bunch of content in our presentations. We get to the presentation. We ramble throughout the whole thing. And the last slide sounds something like this. Oh, yeah, so thanks. That's like 95% of even like senior executives of companies. Like that's what they sound like. And it's crazy. So for me, what I teach is puzzle. Practice your presentation team like a jigsaw puzzle. Start with the edges first. Do the introduction. Just the introduction. 50 bloody times. Not 3 times. Not 5 times. Do the intro 50 times. 50 seems like a big number, but your introduction is like 90 seconds. So it'll take like an hour, hour and a half to do that. Same thing with the close. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie. Same thing with the conclusion. Do it 50 times and then do the middle. And that's the best way to optimize for practice.
Yeah, because I don't know if there's a stat to it, but don't they say that those opening lines, the first few minutes in a presentation or anything like that, is how you get your audience? Am I correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Tanya. First impressions matter for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, I know that one of the stats around, I think you have like 27 to 30 seconds, something like that, before you lose if you don't come in. Yeah. If you don't come in with a strong opening.
Oh yeah, it's so important, and not just presentations. I mean, we feel that as human beings. If somebody comes up to us in the street and they look fishy, like even if they might be the nicest person on earth, they might be just asking for directions. If they just feel off, you'll immediately go, okay, what is this guy trying to do? Versus if the same person came up to you and was wearing a really nice suit and talked in a funny way, you would still take that person really seriously, and you'd be like, oh no, that person I'm sure is. So first impressions matter. Even if we try to fight against this as human beings, it's in our nature, right? It's hard biologically to change that wiring. So we need to just use it to our advantage. So yes, give an amazing 30-second intro, and people will just be amazed by the rest of your presentation, even if it's average.
Oh man.
Now, when we're teaching some of these principles to kids, like, do you have different strategies for children, or is it just kind of the same and maybe teach it a different way, or is it just the same content?
Absolutely. So the content is slightly the same, especially the piece around puzzles. I actually figured that one out coaching kids, funny enough. So I spend 5% of my time actually coaching kids, you too. Most of my clients is kids, so they don't pull my hair out. So they're kids of growth-minded parents. So it's not so bad. But the reason I do this is because it's a part of my mission. I don't make a lot of money coaching kids. It's really about how do I use that information to make my videos easier. And the biggest realization I got coaching kids, especially 5-year-olds, that's the youngest I've coached, like 4 or 5, is they don't know what presentations are, right? So I go like, okay, kids, we're going to do presentations. And then she raises her hand and goes, sorry, Brenden, what's a presentation? Because I don't have them call me Mr. Brenden or any of that nonsense. So they go like, what's a presentation? I'm like, fair question. What is a presentation? I go, well, there's an introduction, a conclusion. And then she asks me the necessary follow-up question that's 100% justified. What's an introduction? What's a conclusion? So I was like, right. So that's how I figured out the puzzle analogy, because all the kids understand it. Like when you do a jigsaw puzzle, which ones you start, they'll go, oh, corners. And I was like, that's exactly what we're going to do with this game that we're going to play. Anyways, given that, the content is the same, Brian, but the difference is how you coach them on the result. So let me explain what that means. So the first tip that I would share that you two can literally apply tomorrow morning is, and I teach my parents to do this too, not with me, but my parent clients, obviously, is whenever your kids want something, force them to give a presentation on why they want it. So the next time they say, Daddy, Mommy, can you buy me this chocolate bar or this PS4 or this video game? Just go make me a 5-minute presentation. And so you never say no. You say, happy to think about it. Can you make me a 5-minute presentation? Even if they're 5 years old. And you'll be surprised, one, at how many times they give up on asking for the thing, which leads to immediate savings. Like that insight, forget coaching programs, you two. You two will make $5,000-$10,000 because you got 4 kids just implementing that one insight. Because there's 80% of things they'll just say, I'll give up. Because you're not saying no. Because if you say no, they'll say, oh, daddy, mommy, like they'll rebel. But if you go, yes, and yes, absolutely, but you need to make me a 5-minute presentation. They go, oh, but I said yes. So they're going to drop a lot of things. You're going to save some money. But what's going to happen, funny enough, is 10 to 20% of the time. I haven't tested this out fully, so I need more parents to split test this with me. But the key is, like, rarely they'll actually make the presentation. One of my first ever clients, he was a 12-year-old kid. He didn't want to get coached on communication. But how I convinced him, I just said, what do you want? Like, what do you want out of life? He said, I want a dog, but my dad won't buy me one.
Oh boy.
Right? So I said, what if I make you the best presentation in the world to convince your dad to buy you? So in every week, he refined that presentation because he wanted that. He was like, what about this? And I said, no, kid, you can't do this because you need to create more buy-in. What's the incentive for Brian to say yes here? So you got to say, okay, say this is $7 an hour, so you'll mow the lawn. So we created this whole presentation, and they bought him a dog in 4 weeks. True story, by the way.
Oh, I believe it.
True story. They were so amazed. They were like, oh my God. So that's one. The other one is do the random word exercise with your kids. That's an easy way to. So when you're in the car, as an example, I have a lot of my parents do this, is in the car, instead of listening to music, when they're picking up their 10-year-old or 15-year-old, they actually do the random word exercise in the car.
That would have been helpful to know 10 days ago.
When we spent like 24 hours in the car.
Oh man, too bad we couldn't interview you before we left. That would have made the
Next trip.
Yeah, next trip.
Awesome. Now, one of the other things too that you focus on is helping people to be a top 1% communicator in their industry. Now, the question I'll ask around that is, how good do you have to be in that top 1%? What does that really look like?
Excellent question, Brian. I get that one a lot. So obviously, top 1% is a figure of speech. There's no actual way to measure if you're a top 1% communicator in your industry. But what I will say is that it will depend on the industry that you're in. That's why I say in your industry. So what does that mean? If you're an accountant, doesn't take much to be a top communicator in your industry. It really doesn't. Even people who own accounting firms, it's horrible. It's horrendous. Like, even if you know how to smile and pause and do a little bit of vocal projection, you're already out batting 95% of your industry, and nobody does the random word exercise 100 times. Like, I'm not even saying do it well, by the way. I'm just saying doing it, period. Right? They're not even willing to do it once. They're like scared out of their wits to even do it once. So doing it 100 times is amazing. But of course, then we get into other fields that are much more competitive, like the creative space, like a lot of my senior level creatives and marketers. Okay, now like a lot of people in that space, the marketing people, they're willing to do the random word exercise. The sales guys and gals, they're willing to do the random word exercise. But obviously, in the more competitive fields, the upside is also much bigger, right? So for example, but even the boring industries too, the upside is massive, right? Like in accounting, like if you're a charismatic accountant, like my goodness, like you got a lot of things going for you. You're making money and you're getting a ton of referrals. But it's also true in sales. I mean, the economics between a top 5% communicator in sales and a top 1% communicator in sales, and it doesn't matter what you're selling, is like 10x, 100x potentially. So that's what it means, is that the criteria on top 1% varies based on the industry that you're in.
Actually, I just had a flashback to to our last conversation. I think we kind of compared this by talking about Usain Bolt, and everybody knows Usain Bolt. He's very, very wealthy from being very fast, but he was only marginally faster than the person who came in second place. And we don't remember who that person is today.
I love that. And even to this day, because it's funny, I forgot about that story. But what's love about Brian is like because I think the last time we had a conversation was like 18 months ago.
Yeah,
like
it was
2 years ago. And what you'd actually showed there for all of us is a great reminder that people don't forget stories, right? They remember two things. One is the stories that you tell them, Tanya and Brian, but the second one is how you made them feel.
Yeah.
So that's why 2 years later you go like, oh, that Brenden, I don't remember 90% what he said, but he seemed like a cool guy. There's something, and that Usain Bolt story. I bet I told you it was Justin Gatlin because he's the guy who got second place, but nobody will remember him, unfortunately.
And it's funny you say that, right? Because even thinking back to teachers and, the kids, you ask them how their day at school was, and they may not tell you, about their spelling test, but they'll always tell you about like a personal story that one of the teachers shared, that kind of stuff, because it makes it definitely more personal when you're communicating, and it really doesn't matter with who, right? Whether a boardroom or kids. So yeah.
Absolutely, Tanya. And that's why, by the way, because it's kind of funny because it's like a second time we're talking. So, like, for example, when I did an interview with Brian, Tanya, back in the day, I actually never brought up my left arm because I saw it as a weakness.
Okay.
But then as I got older, which wasn't that old because it wasn't that long, I started thinking about it and I said, if I mention it, people won't forget that story.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what ended up happening. That's why I changed my talk track. So even I'm constantly evolving my own ideas, and I have a lot more evolving to go. I mean, I'm not the oldest guy you've had on your show, so there's definitely a lot more evolving to go for sure.
Yeah. So I want to take it to a whole nother level. So out of the boardroom and presenting at work, can we talk about, those social gatherings that people go to, whether it be even just at a park with your kids and there's like these parents just hanging around, or birthday parties, what have you. For somebody who's maybe a little bit more introverted, any tips on how they can like just start a conversation?
It's funny, Tanya, because when you said the next level, I thought you were gonna say, "What about the relationship between me and Brian?" That's what I was bracing for impact. Like,
no.
So you were like social gatherings. So I was like, okay,
we'll keep it light.
Okay, I guess I could kind of relate to that because I'm the more introverted one. But
I love that. So yes, okay, you gave me a softball, but you hyped it up, so it's good. So here's what I'll say for social gathering. It's not as hard as people think. So there's two pieces to that, which is mindset and what's practical. So let's start with the mindset. A lot of us are asking the wrong question about meeting new people, team. And the question that they're asking that's wrong is, how do I get everyone to like me? Oh, how do I make sure that every time I walk into a room and I speak, people go, I want to talk to Brian. I want to talk to Tanya. These two are amazing. Or Brenden. But that's the wrong question. The better question is, who do you want those 5,000 people to be? What do I mean by this question? So what I mean is, let's say, figure of speech, we meet somebody new every few days, which is not true for most people, by the way. We don't usually meet somebody new every few days. But let's say we did every 3 or 4 days. So give and take, in a year, we'll meet 100 people. Does that make sense so far? Pretty clear, right? And let's say we live 50 more years than the current age that we're at. So let's say both of you are 30 years old and you live 50 more years. I always go younger because it says I always go young. It's another communication trick. People love it. Okay, so 50 more years, right? Until you two are 80. Okay. So 50 more years. So not to make this a math exam, but if you multiply 50 years by 100 people, it's 5,000. So out of 7.8 billion people, team, you're only going to shake hands with 5,000, which is crazy if you think about it. So this really changes your mindset around relationship building to begin with, where the question will change from, how do I do well at this birthday party, to, why should I even go to this birthday party? Is this even worth my time? My goodness, I don't even like anybody here. So that's one piece. Is the best way to network is just go to the people you already love and have them introduce you to people that they know, because they'll likely have people that they know that they like you. And that's the key. Like, Brian likes me. I hopefully you do too, Tanya. And then there's like going to be another person who goes, ew, I hate this guy. Right? There's nothing you can control, and you just got to go with the punches. In terms of specific tactics, though, let's say you're in that situation, there's actually a very simple way of doing this if you're an introvert. The key is don't talk. Surprising, but when somebody is introverted, what I always recommend them to do, because as Dale Carnegie says, being more interested in other people is actually better than being interesting yourself. Both is obviously ideal, but if you had to pick one, pick the former. So all you have to do is when somebody goes, hey, Brian, why don't you tell me about yourself? All you have to do is flip it back on them. Oh, forget about me. Let's talk about you. and it works every time. No, very few people go, no, Brian. Look, people love to talk about themselves. They just go, okay, and then they just talk for 30 minutes, and you're all set. That's it.
Yeah, no, it works quite well. I've done that myself, where I get asked a question and I'll answer the question and I'll, what about you? And then when as soon as they're done answering, hit them with the next question and just get them talking about themselves. Yeah, it works really well.
I mean, look, it's working fine on me. I got a big ego. I'm not going like, oh, but obviously I know it's a show. But just in general, it's like, yeah, I like talking about me. So let's keep talking.
No, for someone who's more extroverted, what are some tactical pieces to help them be a better listener?
Very good. Very good. And that's something I had to learn. And I'm still learning. I'm not perfect by any means. Here's what I would say, because it's tough. Because the challenge of being an extrovert and learning how to listen is when you're in a live conversation like the one we're having right now, is you always want to think of something cool to say. So you're spending half of your brain listening and the other half going, how can I sound smart in this conversation? So I make an impression and I look cool because I'm an extrovert and all that stuff. So there's actually a couple of things around this. So number one, I would say, audit the percentage of questions versus statements that you say in everyday conversation. What does that mean? That means when you actually look at communication in everyday life, I would not assume it would be the case with you two. You two seem like an amazing couple, but most of the time when we have conversations, it's usually statement. It's a ping-ponging of statements. What does that mean? Well, I believe this. Well, I believe that. Well, I think this, and I think that. It's always statement. Whereas what the best communicators on the planet do is whenever somebody goes, well, I believe this, they always respond with, why do you believe that? Why is that important to you? Honey, why is it important that I take the trash out every day? Why is that important? Why is that why do you find that fascinating? Why is that valuable for you? So they respond with questions. But a lot of the times when we honestly audit the questions that we ask other people on a day-to-day basis, we'll often find that the answer is either 0, 1, or 2. So it's very low. So we need to increase the percentage of questions that come out of our mouth, and that will automatically help us practice listening. That's one piece. The other piece is to listen to conversations and take notes of conversations that already are finished. And I mean that very specifically. So what I do, and I used to do, and I still do to this day, is I spend 10 hours a week listening to other podcasts where I'm listening and I can't respond. I can't talk. Even if I wanted to. Oh, I have something to say. Nobody cares, Brenden, because the conversation's over. So I have to listen, and that's made me. And the third one, as I do this a lot, whenever I'm listening to people, are this, and it's a verbal cue, non-verbal cue for me to remind myself to listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm the extrovert, and you hit it right there, because it's that you almost always want to have the conversation going, right? And I've learned it is okay to have that dead air. You can take a break. But for me, I'm that one, like if I was in a circle with a whole bunch of random people, or just people that I'm not as close to, I would be the one to start asking the questions, and more so just to get that conversation going instead of everybody just standing there, with their arms folded.
Completely agree. Me and you are in the same bucket there, Tanya.
Yeah. But for sure, you definitely want to listen and just be able to, I guess, add to the conversation as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you talked a little bit earlier about practicing for, a few minutes a day. How much time do you actually, I guess I'll ask you, how much time do you actually spend working on communication now? And, for a client, what would that kind of look like when you're getting them started?
Absolutely. So there's different seasons for different people. So because you're asking me for my own practice schedule too, right? Just to make sure I got the question right.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I want to make sure we caveat. So let me start with the first piece. What I'm asking for the general public, everyone listening to this, is only 15 minutes a day. 5 minutes to do the random word exercise with your kids, people around you, things like that. 5 minutes answering one question on your expertise. That's it, right? One question on communication, one question on security. I'm not sure what field of work you're in, Tanya, but one question on the amazing passions you have in life, right? Once a day, and do that every day. Okay, simple. That's it. And the third one is just send a few video messages. Pick 3 people a day and just Hey, really appreciate you. Done. Facebook Messenger takes 20 seconds. You're done. That's what I expect the general public to do. So there's 3 levels here. What do I expect my clients to do? Clients is very different because they're paying me a lot of money to work with me, and it's not hundreds of dollars, right? It's thousands of dollars. So those people, I have a whip. And it's like, if you don't do the random word exercise 100 times in 2 weeks, I'll fire your ass. So it's a different level. Because those people are, like you actually, but like both of you, I believe, or, senior executives, you both, serious people. So the people who invest in their communication, they want a return on that money. They're spending
For
3-5
sure.
grand to work on with a speech coach. So they want to make an ROI. So those people I don't go easy on. Me, it's like I'm hardcore. They're sending me like 10 videos a week, and that's their priority for the next 90 days. So they can get a nice salary boost
Yep.
at the end of that 90 days, or they get like a growth of the business. And then there's me. Okay, this is going to be scary for people. So look, I actually don't do what I preach, like the 5 minutes thing. And the reason I don't do that is because it's a joke for me. Like I would never do that. For me, it's more like 5 hours straight of hardcore questions. Like when I started the business when I was 22, I did the question drill like 300 times. Like I've done the random word exercise 3,000 times. Like, and I'm not exaggerating these numbers. That's why I guessed well on shows. Like just this week, if I look at my calendar, just actually forget this week, guys, because you asked me the question. Just today, how many interviews? This is my last one today. How many interviews do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I had 7 interviews just today.
Wow.
Just today, right? So, I mean, a week, I'm probably spending 30 hours a week practicing my communication. I'm guessing on 15, 20 shows a week. And a lot of it has nothing to do with business because I don't even generate a lot of clients from this because I just like talking to people. What this does is it helps me prepare for a very advanced subject I teach clients that if we want, we can get into, but it might be complicated for people, which is what is your long-term communication vision? So, for example, for me, one of my dreams is to be on Joe Rogan when I'm in my 30s. But instead of just putting that in a piece of paper, I'm preparing for that moment.
Mhm.
So even if a lot of the podcasts I go on don't really return anything for me, they're automatic practice reps so that when I
Right.
am 33 and I'm number 1 in my space and Joe Rogan's like, "Hey, let's talk about the UFC and I have you on," I knock that sucker out of the park. So yes, it's different levels for different people. I call it different temperatures for different people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
'Cause we're all in it for different reasons, but at the
Correct.
end of the day, everybody should know how to communicate and will benefit from putting this into practice. So it makes
Correct.
sense.
Yeah, so could we run through just kind of give an example, I guess, of the first with the random word exercise. So if we throw out a random word, because I know this is a softball question for you because you've done this so much, but just to kind of demonstrate for everybody who's watching or listening.
Let's have Tanya pick the word.
Yeah, I was just gonna
Oh
say
gosh. So any word?
any word.
Mistake. I just saw it on the whiteboard.
Ooh, I like that. So I've never done mistake. So by the way, for those who are listening to this podcast, Tanya did not give me the word mistake prior to this conversation. I'm literally making this up on the spot, which is what I'm going to do right now. A lot of us in life, we focus on the successes. What is going to make us successful in life? All the amazing roads, all of the great accomplishments, the trophies, the medallions. But a lot of us don't talk enough about the mistakes that we make in our lives, the shortcomings, the time that we want a shortcut in life, but we end up getting the short end of the stick for trying to take a shortcut. Those little mistakes, some of them could be major, some of them could be small, but the point is for without mistakes, there is no success. Because a lot of the greatest successes in our life are often hard earned. And a lot of us try to hide from our mistakes. But we need to realize that successful people make a lot of them. In fact, they make so many of them that they become numb to them. The relationship with failure is different. So what does that mean for you listening to this podcast? It means the following. You are only 5, 10, 15, 50, 75 mistakes away from your big break. So what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for that success to just fall in your lap, or are you going to be willing to go through the 75 or even the 750 mistakes to get to the goalpost? And that's the random word exercise.
Wow.
That's
okay. So when you do that, like, are we talking to ourselves in the mirror? Am I like talking to my kids about this random word? Like, who are we presenting this to?
Right, Tanya. So a couple of things. Let me start the first one. The most important goal of the random word exercise is to have fun. So don't overthink this. So for example, and your kids are a great example. I don't know how old they are. How old's the youngest?
We have 13 twins that are 10 and a 6-year-old.
Okay, awesome. So let's take the 6-year-old as an example. So if we give the 6-year-old the random word exercise, they're not going to ask me the question you just asked me, Tanya. They're just going to go, "Oh, mommy, you said cup? Okay, so a cup is," and they're just going to start doing the exercise. And there's a great quote by the movie Yes Man that I love to quote here. And the quote is, "The world is our playground. As children, we understand this lesson well, but as we grow up, we forget it along the way." And the reason why I love doing this with kids is because they don't think too much about it. They just do it. And what I tell my clients all the time, Tanya, and Brian, everyone else, is you don't get points on how well you do the exercise. You get points on how many times you do it. So the first, because remember, I've done it 3,000 times, but that wasn't the first 30 times. The first 30 times, like a mistake is something bad that happens in your life. And you kind of don't like communication, but then your kid has a good idea, and then you have fun with it. But after 100 times, which doesn't take a long time, by the way, it's like 60 seconds per exercise, then you start to have fun with it. Then you go, what if I got mistake? What would I do next? And then you're on your way. So that's really the key, is about removing the fear of judgment than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. That was a good one. Now, since we were on the topic, actually, we got you on the topic of mistakes. Is there a mistake or a failure that you've experienced either in public speaking or in business that you've been able to turn around and learn from? Because it's kind of along the theme of what you were just talking about.
Oh yeah, I mean, so many screw-ups. We could spend the whole the whole episode just talking about that. I mean, not knowing how to pronounce your name is a big mistake, especially since you're an early believer in what I did. So that's one, right? I would say the other ones though that are just as significant is definitely communication. Lots of mistakes. I used to be very aggressive and had a very short temper. I got it a lot from my dad. So every time I would give feedback, I'm still hard on people, but I'm a lot more controlled these days. Before, I was like a tyrant. I was like the Michael Jordan that nobody gave a shit about in university. Like, I was crazy. I was like yelling at people at 2 a.m. and like humiliating them in front of people. It was crazy. So yes, a lot of those mistakes were made. And I got kicked out of the committee for doing that. Fair enough. So there's those mistakes, and then there's other mistakes where I keynoted a few years ago in front of 400 kids, and I found out 15 minutes before the presentation that I had to do half the bloody thing in French. I was like, what? Like, why did anyone tell me that? So I had to literally translate the presentation on the fly as I was presenting. It was funny. So there's that. And then the mistakes I made in business. I mean, God knows how many mistakes I made. But I would say one in particular was wasting my life emailing 50,000 university professors to share my content with their students. So that sounded good on paper, guys, right? It was like, okay, if I email these university professors, I have such great content, they'll distribute my content forever because they always change students. So it's like unlimited distribution. Yeah, they didn't take a liking to me. They were like, "You're too young. Why are you emailing me? Who are you? Why is a kid sending me YouTube videos?" I got so much hate email. It was so bad. But you know what the worst part was? Because it's on totally on them, in their power. But the mistake was mine, not theirs. Because I should have stopped after 300 emails. I should have been like, okay, like these people are pricks. Obviously, there's some university professors that are very kind that supported my work, but like they were a dime in a dozen, like three or five of them maybe out of all of them. And they were very nice to me. Everyone else wasn't. But the point I want to drive is Brenden should have stopped at 500. If I had emailed 50,000 podcast hosts, I would already be a megastar. I would already be like I would have had like 40,000 podcasts or something. And yeah, stupid mistake. So yeah, I think the lesson is don't be stubborn. Like mentors of honestly, guys, and I always like to say this on the record. The reason I got this far this quickly has very little to do with me. There's like an invisible village, like a huge village. The guy who does my videos is my best friend. He doesn't charge me a lot of money because we have a relationship. We're buddies, right? But the guy who made my logo did it on a whim. I didn't even go like, I need a logo. Somebody was eating a burger with me, and he just said, "Hey, you need a logo," and he made me one. Now he does paintings for like Real Madrid and FC Barcelona. He gets paid crazy amounts of money, and he did mine for free because I was his friend. And then the MasterTalk, the name MasterTalk, you think I was this genius who came up with the name? Wow, that's such a nice name. I have a trademark for. My friend came up with the name MasterTalk, not me. Okay. And my business partner's 20 years older than me, so there you go.
Yeah, no, it's true. It really, they say it's all about your circle, right? Who's in it and who you meet along the way too, because there can be a lot of neat connections, and there's always those good backstories behind talking to people in your position, right?
100%. I mean, you two are a great example of this too. Because if Brian doesn't believe in me, he doesn't bring me on to the next thing. He doesn't introduce me to his network. And you've been very generous with that, by the way, Brian. But I think the point is like you need to enroll people into your vision. You need to get people. You can never do anything on your own. And I've been fortunate that I've been surrounded with a lot of great people.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess one thing I'll just share with people real quick who are who are part of this conversation. When you're one of the things that really helps with networking is just like remembering people's names.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they didn't do that well.
But the one thing I learned this trick a while ago. It worked for me, so maybe it will work for others. But when you're introducing yourself, people, and it kind of goes back to something that you said earlier, Brenden, but people are generally thinking about how they're going to introduce themselves, right? Like, your name, so it shouldn't be too difficult. So people get so caught up on introducing themselves that they don't even take in the person's name when they introduce themselves. So really, the thing that I try to focus on is like when they say their name, I repeat it back to them and just try to find a way to just remember that. And but I found it was so much more effective just by really focusing, just by actually consciously focusing on what their name is.
Oh yeah, I love that. And obviously, I'm not perfect at this, but basically what I would say is I agree. Alex Hormozy says that in a conversation with someone, you want to keep repeating their name. So notice how I said Tanya a lot and your name as well, Brian. It's also to etch it in my mind so I don't mispronounce it. So what's nice is like when you do that a lot, it becomes automatic. So then when there's more touch points with that person, you'll always remember their name. So yeah, completely agreed.
Yeah. And as you get older and you're not in your early 30s, it's way easier to forget. I've had like the worst time with that. You just meet a mom, picking up kids from some sports or something like that. And it's like, oh, shoot, what was that person's name again? Right. So it makes sense to say it a few times to get that in your head. Or, like even when I put in the phone now, it's like so-and-so's mom. Or, so that you can remember, it's like you picture this person, with the other person, or, okay, this person works at this place, right? Just having that to keep in your mind because our brains are full. We have so much in there, but people love when you remember, who they are, where you met them, and all that kind of stuff. So just an extra special touch.
Absolutely. Completely agreed.
Yeah. And a great tool for that too, that I found is LinkedIn. Because when I meet people, I try to connect with them on LinkedIn right away because then it gives you that name and face. Like my best friend, he always jokes around that he's terrible with names and faces. so when you connect on LinkedIn, it gives you both. And when you add somebody as a new connection, it gives you reminders like, hey, you connected with this person 3 days ago. Why don't you send them a message, right? So, then we can start implementing your tip of sending them a video message because you can do that on LinkedIn as well.
Absolutely. So, and nobody does it.
No, it's funny because I did it. There's probably about a year and a half ago, I did it for my podcast, and I ran a poll, and everybody who responded to the poll, it was, I don't know, it was like 90 people, but I sent every one of them a video message.
Wow.
And yeah, it was pretty impactful.
Well, next time do that with people who comment on your feed. So that way it's a lot less people, and then it's more efficient.
But yeah, no, but definitely does have an impact. So, but yeah, I think I'll try that next time rather than reaching out to everyone who responded to the poll.
Yeah, that's tough because it's like if like somebody does a little bit for you and you like buy them a Lamborghini. It's like whoa. Let's comment on my feed. Like, dude, that's harder. And if you do that, then you reciprocate with the video message. I still do that to this day, actually. people who comment a lot on my feed. That's why my engagement has increased a lot since we first talked. It's because of that. Because if you have the right 50 people who are always commenting and you're sending them video messages every month, they'll keep commenting because they just, yeah.
Yeah, and there's that connection, right? They feel they're connected, they know who you are, and all that kind of stuff. So
you got it.
Good. Well,
all right. Well, Brenden, I think this conversation will hopefully has gotten into the right ears and eyes, and people want to learn more, want to improve their public speaking. So for those who want to do that, what are the best ways for them to connect with you?
Absolutely. Always great to reconnect with both of you. Thanks so much for having me. This is great. So 2 ways to keep in touch. The first one is the YouTube channel. Just go to MasterTalk in one word. You'll have access to a ton of free videos on how to communicate ideas, or follow the URL at the bottom of the screen. And the second way to keep in touch is to come to one of my free trainings. So I do a free training on communication and public speaking over Zoom. It's free, it's live, it's fun, and it's definitely not boring, hopefully, because I facilitate it. So you go to rockstarcommunicator.com and you can register for our next one.
Awesome. Well, Brenden, thanks for making the time once again. Appreciate you, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, you too. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a blast.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.